The wall clock read 6:45 p.m. when Dona Marta put the kettle on the stove. The hiss of the gas blended with the heavy silence that filled the small house in Jardim Esperança, a neighborhood in the northern part of the city. She had lived there for over 40 years. She had seen the street change, neighbors come and go, and the city grow. But nothing, not even time, had been able to heal the deepest pain she carried, watching her own son slowly destroy himself. Caio had been a sweet boy. He used to play with toy cars in the backyard, loved to draw, and cried in secret when watching sad movies. But adolescence had taken that sparkle from his eyes. It started with bad company, then skipping school, and finally, the discovery of addiction. First alcohol, then marijuana, until at 24, he gave himself over to crack. Since then, he was never the same. Now 33, Caio was a shadow of the son Marta had once known. Thin, with a lost gaze, he lived in cycles of euphoria and despair. On good days, he locked himself in his room, listening to music. On bad ones, he yelled, threatened, and begged for money. And she, who had already sold everything she could to pay for rehab clinics, treatments, and the debts he made on the streets, had no strength left, nor resources. That night, he was agitated. He stomped his feet loudly, prowled the house like a caged animal. Marta knew what was coming. She tried to avoid the confrontation, tried to ignore his looks, but it was no use. "Mom, give me 50. Just that. I need it," Caio said, standing in the kitchen doorway, his eyes sunken and jaw clenched. "Caio, my son, I already told you I don't have it. I don't even have money for bread this week," she answered, her voice choked, but firm. "Always the same crap," he shouted, throwing a chair against the wall. "You do have it, you're just hiding it from me." Marta stepped back. Her body trembled instinctively. She had seen that look before, the same one from other nights when he pushed her, locked her in the room, or left her lying on the floor while he searched the house for any spare change. But in that moment, she made a decision. She would not give in anymore. "I'm not your victim anymore, Caio. If you're going to hit me, then hit me. But I won't keep feeding your destruction," she said, eyes brimming with tears, but locked onto his. The silence that followed was the most terrifying of all. Caio stared at her with rage, fists clenched, breathing heavily. He took a step forward. Across the street, leaning on the gate of a modest but well-kept house, retired Sergeant Enrique listened to the shouting. He had sensed for months that something was wrong in that house. Sad looks, dragging footsteps, muffled screams. But the right moment to act had always seemed just out of reach. That night, Dona Marta's silence would finally be broken. But not in the way Caio expected. The rain had just started to fall, lightly, when the first blow struck the wall. Caio, consumed by rage, punched doors, kicked furniture, and shouted insults that hurt more than any physical blow. Dona Marta shrank into the corner of the kitchen, her trembling hands clutching her apron, her face pale. Fear, though an old companion, still made her heart race. "You think you can tell me what to do? I'm your son," Caio screamed, spitting each word. Enrique, across the street, had already moved closer to the gate. He could hear everything. His instincts as a police officer, even in retirement, had never left him. He could tell the difference between a typical argument and a disguised cry for help. And what he was hearing from that house was different. It was brutal, inhumane. A sharp sound, skin striking skin, echoed moments later. A slap. Loud. Then a dull thud, like someone had been thrown to the floor. "Let go of me, Caio. Let me go." Marta cried out, her voice weak and desperate. That was enough. Enrique crossed the street in a flash. He didn't bother knocking. He kicked the door open with practiced precision, just like he'd done countless times during his years of service. The old wood gave way easily. What he saw on the other side froze him for a second. Caio had his hand raised, ready to strike again. Dona Marta was on the floor next to the refrigerator, clutching her swollen face, a small cut bleeding from her brow. Her eyes widened at the sight of Enrique, as if she'd seen an angel or a miracle. "That's enough." Enrique roared, his voice firm, commanding. His presence filled the room with a force that silenced everything. "Let her go." Now, Caio, stunned, hesitated. His eyes darted between his mother on the floor and the neighbor in the doorway. Enrique took 2 steady steps forward, moving like a man who knew exactly what to do. Caio, impulsive, tried to resist, but was quickly overpowered. The old sergeant still had sharp reflexes. Within seconds, Caio was on the ground, restrained, cursing and spitting, but without the strength to truly fight back. "Stay down. You're going to answer for this," Enrique said, pulling his phone from his pocket to call the police. "And you'd better pray she doesn't die, because if she does, you're never leaving prison." Dona Marta wept softly in the corner. Her body trembled with fear, relief, and shame. She had never imagined the humiliation inside her home would become public. But in that moment, for the first time in a long time, she felt something different: relief. The patrol car didn't take long. In less than 10 minutes, the house was filled with police officers and concerned neighbors watching from a distance. Caio was handcuffed and taken to the station. In the front seat of the ambulance, Dona Marta was being treated by paramedics, while Enrique sat quietly beside her. She squeezed his hand tightly, her eyes brimming with tears, and whispered, "Thank you for hearing me." Enrique just nodded. He knew that from that moment on, that woman's life would never be the same, and neither would his. Night fell heavily over the Jardim Esperança neighborhood. Dona Marta's house, now surrounded by police cars and curious onlookers, could no longer hide the dark secret that had lingered within its walls for so long. Caio was taken away protesting, shouting that it was all a lie, that his mother provoked him, that no one understood what he was going through. But the bruises on Dona Marta's face spoke for themselves. The police charged him with assault against an elderly person, a crime with aggravated penalties, and immediately contacted social services. At the police station, the duty officer knew Enrique from back in the day. The retired sergeant was still respected by the force. His words were taken seriously, and the evidence, testimonies, visible injuries, and Dona Marta's emotional state was enough to keep Caio in custody. Meanwhile, at the municipal hospital, Dona Marta received medical care. She had a fractured rib, abrasions on her face and hands. But the deepest wounds were the invisible ones. The attending doctor noticed it right away. After the exams, she was referred to a psychologist on the emergency team. "You're safe now," the psychologist said gently. "But you need to understand, living in fear is not living." Marta, who had remained silent until then, only nodded as tears slid from the corners of her eyes. For the first time in years, someone had said those words out loud, and she was beginning to believe them. The next day, Enrique returned to the hospital. He brought a bag with clothes, fruit, and a blanket he had folded himself. When he walked into the room, Marta smiled with a mix of gratitude and shame. "I never wanted to expose my son," she said, staring at the bedsheet. "And I never wanted to enter your house uninvited, Dona Marta. But if I hadn't, today I might be attending a neighbor's funeral," Enrique replied, serious, but with tenderness in his eyes. The visit was brief, just long enough for Marta to feel she wasn't alone. In the week that followed, Caio appeared before a custody hearing. The judge, moved by the history of drug dependency and violence, ordered his preventive detention and a mandatory evaluation for involuntary treatment. The public prosecutor's office monitored the case closely. For the first time, the system seemed to be working as it should. Marta, now under protection and receiving support, was temporarily taken in by a niece, far from the neighborhood where everything had happened. The house where she had lived for 4 decades would be sealed, and a court order would prohibit Caio from approaching his mother. In the final paragraph of the psychologist's report submitted to the court, one sentence stood out: "This woman survived her own home. Now she needs to learn how to live outside of it." 3 months had passed since that night when Dona Marta's pain finally found a voice and a response. Time, though it couldn't erase the scars, had begun to heal them. Marta had moved to the countryside, taken in by her niece Elisa, who lived on a peaceful small farm just a few miles from a city. There, surrounded by greenery, silence, and human warmth, she began to experience a life without fear. For the first time in decades, she woke up without hearing angry footsteps in the hallway, without the harsh slam of doors, without the crushing weight of looking at her son and seeing only destruction. But longing still lived in her heart, even if it was laced with pain. He was her son, after all. She loved him. She just couldn't sacrifice herself for him anymore. Kaio, now under mandatory treatment in a court-ordered rehab clinic, had begun to show signs of recovery. Slow, difficult, but real. In the first days, he refused help, cursed, shouted. Then came silence. And now he was facing the hard truth. He was alive because someone had stopped him from committing an even more serious, perhaps irreversible, crime. In sessions with psychologists and psychiatrists, he finally admitted the shame he felt, the self-hatred, the guilt. He began writing letters. The first one took weeks to send. It didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't know how, but it said he was trying to change. Marta read every word with a tight heart. She didn't respond. Not yet. But she kept the letter carefully folded next to an old photo of him as a child, knees scraped, a silly smile on his face. Meanwhile, back in Jardim Esperança, Sergeant Enrique was quietly recognized by neighbors and even local authorities. A city newspaper ran a story titled, "Hero Neighbor Saves Elderly Woman from Abuse. Silence Turned into Justice." He never liked the spotlight, but he reluctantly accepted an honor at the city council. He stepped onto the stage in an old suit, received a plaque of appreciation, and said only a few words. "I just did what any human being should do when they hear a cry for help. Act." Applause echoed through the room. Today, Marta walks through the yard of her new home with slow but steady steps. She tends to some flowers, feeds the birds, and chats with Elisa about life's little things. The trauma still visits her sometimes, especially at night, but she has learned to face it with a strength she never knew she had. Her story, once told in whispers behind closed doors, is now an example of courage. A story of pain, yes, but also of salvation. Because sometimes, all it takes for a life to change is for someone to listen and choose not to stay silent.